City. The proverb, Tafdali?
The proverb today, as if it weren't bad enough to fall, the ladder lands on top of you.
As if it wasn't bad enough to fall, the ladder lands on top of you.
Yes.
Adding salt to injury.
Kabisa.
It's just, when it rains, it pours.
Kabisa. As you say, Murphy's Law.
Murphy's Law. Whatever will go wrong
this one
will go wrong.
This one is definitely going to go wrong.
You will fall. You will get injured. The ladder itself
will come and collapse on your head.
On your head. Can you imagine? This is a case of what maybe is happening now. So Ndende Nyoro's Committee of Budget and Appropriations of the National Assembly presented its report to Parliament yesterday, and so it's going to be discussed and debated. And what is basically happening is that Parliament is recommending that the government spends 3.679 trillion shillings in the next financial year that begins on the 1st of July. The National Treasury had gone to Parliament and requested for authority to spend some 3.599 trillion shillings. The Committee on Budget and Appropriations looked at what the government was proposing to do, where it wanted to take the money, and they said, no, we've got to increase this budget by 81 billion shillings. 81 billion shillings. Now remember, the budget that had been taken to Parliament by the previous administration was 3.2 trillion shillings. And then through supplementary budget, they increased that, excuse me,
bless you,
to some 3.3 trillion shillings. Now their expenditure is going to close to 3.7 trillion shillings. The revenues that had been estimated at the beginning of the current financial year was something about 2.4 trillion shillings. Okay? Clearly, just going by the actual revenues collected as at the end of April and looking at the month is coming to an end and the year is coming to an end, we are not likely to hit 2 trillion shillings.
No.
And that's why the government has ended up borrowing a lot more to cover that shortfall. The target this time is that the government is going to raise 2.8 trillion shillings in revenue. 2.8 trillion. Clearly, they'll not hit that target unless they tax everybody, even those who are just passing by Kenya. You are passing by Kenya on transit.
Pay something
by just being in Kenya, right? And increase the amount of money that you're paying. Whatever happens, the likelihood of that happening is actually low. The reality of things are the way they are. Now the question is it justified for the government to come up with such a high budget? Is 3.7 trillion shillings budget justified? There is what the budget committee has looked at, and they are justified. You know what? We are going to have our expenditure is going to be X amount of money, and our recurrent expenditure is going to be 1.565 trillion shillings, and a development expenditure of 743 billion shillings. Counties will receive 385 billion shillings, and all this and the other. There's the whole thing of public finance management and what percentage should go to recurrent versus development, that there should always be a development budget that goes here. So if our recurrent rises, then that means that in order to meet that threshold of 70-30, we have to have at least 30% of that being, so our budget has to go up. Very many stories come up. Question is, are we at a point where the government should actually be looking at austerity? We hear austerity. Do we see austerity from government?
No, we don't. But of course, you have to ask the questions. We're looking at these extra numbers. But the question is, it's necessary to find out this 80.7 billion, they're now adding on over and above the initial numbers, because we saw 3.599 trillion as the initial number that was presented on the budget estimates, right? That has risen significantly. This additional 80 billion in the final committee report and what it is being attributed to, why did it not show up before if it was extremely important in terms of priority? And what would it then be for? If you look at the breakdown that we've been given of the 7.3 billion that goes to State House, the Office of the Prime CS, 547 million. Internal Security and National Administration, 1.52 billion. I mean, the list goes on and on. But it doesn't take somebody with more degrees than a thermometer to realize right now that if anything, what should be happening is a lean and basically tail tucked in between your legs in terms of spending government today. Austerity measures, yes, we've heard them. We've heard of them. Have they ever really been applied is the question. But it seems as though these numbers are jumping out and there's no recognition of the problem that the country really is in. Of all the indications that we've been given time and again of, look, folks who went down the deep, dark hole, this is where they started. It doesn't seem to bleed in any way or on anybody's conscience. And so I think it is about time that we started, look at the different places where you can actually cut and be lean. It is absolutely necessary. It should not be a suggestion. It should not be something that you whip out of a hat during a conversation to sound intellectual. It is actually something that you ought to do. Are there ways that you can cut? Absolutely do them. Do them. Because the truth of the matter is, right now, a very simple and basic question. You don't need to even invite all the economic legalese. Where are you going to get the money from? You cannot bleed a stone. Right now, it is not coming from anywhere. Where is it going to come from? The people that you want to tax, you have taxed them until right now, even to finish this budget, this fiscal year, to finish this budget by the end of this month, it is not there. They're not going to meet their targets for this year. And you're being ambitious and saying in the next 12 months, we're going to collect over and above that.
About 2. 1 trillion more.
2.8 trillion is now what you want to collect. It's a very simple question. Where is it going to come from? If you do not have an answer that you can see making sense, you can say we'll tax. It's a good answer to give, right?
Yep.
It's a very good answer to give. But is it practical? If right now the problem that you are in is the one that you depended on for the last year has not even been realized, and you want to depend on the same donkey, now it is on 2 legs, and maybe one of those legs is on its knees. If you don't have an answer about where this money is going to come from, it is okay to take a step back and say, hold on, guys. We are treading in dangerous waters here, because that is the truth. That is the truth.
As you say it, is there anything that we've seen from this particular government that tells you that when they have charted a certain path, what is the likelihood that they'll deviate from it? Because to ask this government to pause, that is exactly what you are doing.
Yes.
And yet, there is something that must be brought into this discussion. If you look at the Star, the headline talks about 77 billion Kenya shillings that was spent by the previous administration of Uhuru Kenyatta in projects, most of which, according to that article, have never been completed. And yet they say some of the people who were supposed to be the developers of these projects were paid in full. For the projects to have existed, you can only assume that it was in the budget, money was allocated for it. Now, if you have projects that are incomplete, do you hear any conversations about completing the projects that were not completed, or doing due diligence to determine what really happened and telling us? But usually you don't need to, because the Auditor General is the one who flags these things and says, you guys spent this money on this, but this thing doesn't add up. It's incomplete, and here's the situation we find ourselves in. But even more significantly, even if we talk about the billions,
Bless you.
Thank you. State House now has a separate budget. It's delinked from the president's office. But you do the maths, 4 billion plus 7 billion, you get around 11 billion. Forget that maths of the very many billions we keep seeing here. I looked at this list that has been presented in the Standard, and I looked at all this public service, investment promotion, blah, 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 blah. Which of these ministries or which of these state departments deal with emergencies? I'm asking because we've been in a state of emergency now for quite some time. Started with COVID.
Yep.
And then the aftermath of COVID brought in new emergencies.
Yep.
The Disaster Management Authority has
Yes.
never been given wings to fly.
It is the situation I'm speaking of manifests itself in everything that is being complained about, from skyrocketing food prices, the inability for one to eke a living, all these things. Now, I looked at this list. I listened to what was being said. Perhaps I missed something. Is there something that was put to within this budget to address and alleviate this disaster that just keeps rolling downhill? People who cannot afford to live in their own country.
Those are the big questions to ask. And when of course, if the day that we are going to have, because we've invited and we know he'll come, the day we are going to have Mr. Ndindi Nyoro, the chairman of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, to come and explain their thinking through this entire budget and how they've sort of approved the budget estimates for the next financial year. He'll come and give us very many good figures. He'll tell us, this is how much we've allocated for recurrent expenditure, which includes also the consolidated fund expenditure and services. This includes paying of debt, and then this is how much we've allocated to development. And in development, we have this. He'll give us all those figures. But on this recurrent expenditure, this is where also a lot of money is going into just maintaining a government. All right? And those are the questions that we ought to be hearing from our legislators and everybody else on how much is the government actually cutting back on excesses, on excess fat. So yes, we understand there is debt. But you know what? By approving a 3.6 trillion shilling budget and looking at the revenue and the revenue targets and seeing how much we have been able to collect in the last couple of years, and then looking at the revenue target for this year, you know very well that that revenue target will be revised downwards, which means that the deficit will be revised upwards. And deficit is basically Parliament approving a loan. The word deficit is, this is how much you're going to borrow so that you can bridge that gap, that budget gap. Let's look at some of these deficits in the last couple of years. For instance, the budget for 2019-2020 was 2.62 trillion shillings. The revenue in that year was 1.57 trillion shillings against a budget of 2.6 trillion shillings. Deficit, 790 billion shillings. That is basically Parliament saying you can borrow 790 billion shillings. The next financial year, the deficit was 929 billion shillings. Deficit against a budget of 2.7 trillion. You've been told you can borrow 929 trillion. In 2021-2022, deficit of 785 billion shillings. 2022-2023, deficit of 824 billion shillings. In the current financial year, what was the budgeted deficit? At the beginning of the year, what was approved by Parliament at the beginning of the year was a deficit of 663 billion shillings. At the end of the financial year, the deficit has shot up to over a trillion shillings, 1.2 trillion shillings. It's doubled. And the revenue target for this financial year was 2.4 trillion shillings. They have revised it. Their current operating target is 2.1 trillion shillings. They will not hit 2.1 trillion shillings. Basically, what Parliament is doing by saying you can spend 3.6 trillion shillings in the next financial year is saying you can borrow about 1.something trillion shillings. It's allowing the government to borrow more. This government has come in on a platform of saying we are not borrowing. We are cutting back on borrowing. When you run on a high deficit, you're basically saying I'm going to borrow. Where do those two meet? Why are we talking about continuing to spend so much on a government? Why?
You know, Eric, you've talked about cutting on excesses, and this has been said. I believe we heard a couple of months ago, David D, as an advisor to government in economic affairs, talk about the excessive in government are just they're too much. There's so much unnecessary spending. And I think a lot of folks, we say it. Again, one of the things that we just kind of say, we just keep going along. But what are some of these excesses that we talk about? That government is spending money on some of these things that perhaps they do not need to. Like what though? Because they will ask you that question. Okay, Sasa, you don't want us.
Where would you like us to cut?
Where would you like us to cut? So if we're having this conversation, then I think it's important for us to say, okay, is it necessary that some things be? And I know one of the big ticket items was it necessary that you have 50 CASs? Is that absolutely necessary? That you're paying in excess of millions of shillings every month to have those offices and all the adjunct staff, as well as their salaries and all the things the trimmings that go along vehicles, drivers, etc., etc. Is that absolutely necessary? You could save yourself a pretty penny if you remove that option. Is it possible to run government departments without this position? Because if we're talking about cutting, it's a match. We're talking about to save yourself. If you're going to eat bread and you normally have the trimmings, now we're removing the trimmings. Abi? And then you just eat the bread. If you had 2-3 spoons of sugar, reduce it by half, that kind of thing. And so that has been one of the things. Do you need that office? If you don't need it, remove it. We talk, and another one that has come up is offices of spouses that may not absolutely be necessary. Are those needed? Can we take those away? Is it necessary for the large amounts of money that we see being spent on food and entertainment coming out of government departments and travel coming out of government departments? Is it necessary that when there is a mission of government to one nation for benchmarking or for etc., that a whole barrage of 20 people go? Because an air ticket is not cheap either. Is it possible that we see some of those excesses being cut down? If you want to know a government that is serious with the situation that Kenya faces today, you will see that there has been cutting in these things. You will see. But as I always, how much then could actually be saved, properly saved, from cutting away some of these things?
We can actually see, we can tell, okay? When President William Ruto first addressed Parliament, he said, I believe even the budget that this House passed last year should have been 300 billion. We can cut back 300 billion shillings from this year's expenditure. And he instructed the National Treasury and others to find where the 300 billion shillings would come from and cut. Of course they didn't. Of course they didn't come back. They didn't cut back 300 billion shillings. But the indicator has been that the president says, no, we can spend 300 billion shillings less from the current financial year's budget, which means that we already, if the president has sat down with his advisors and with everybody and has been told, you know what, you can actually look for 300 billion shillings and cut back, then that is already our marker that they can cut back 300 billion shillings. What have they done instead? The first budget of the William Ruto administration is raising the expenditure by over 400 billion shillings from the previous one. The one that just the other day in October, he was saying should be 300 billion shillings less. So what is this 400 billion shillings more than that you want to spend?
Where is it coming
And in fact, even Parliament thinks you should even spend an extra 81 billion shillings from what you thought you should spend. What is it? Should we not be getting signs from a government that shows, all right, we are cutting back, we are actually cutting, so this is it? They'll ask us, okay, so do you want us to fire staff? Not necessarily, but what else would you do?
What else can you do?
Where was this 300 billion shillings that the president thought could be reduced in this year's budget?
Because one would hope. Yeah.
Where was it? Where had
it?
he identified the 300 billion shillings? Go and remove that.
One would hope that by the time he came up with that figure, that he had seen things, or he had been told of things that could have been removed that would come to this amount. I do not want to imagine that he woke up one morning and said, 300 billion sounds like a good number. You guys go, save that. No, it came from somewhere. If you have somebody who is interested in making sure that this ship stays afloat, you will see some of those things. You will see it. There will not be an appetite to spend more. But we don't see that. Why? If 1 + 1 = 2, then there is really no appetite to cut back on excesses. It's still a man world out there in government as well, where everybody wants to make sure that there's cushioned.
Government is a vehicle for people to
Kenyans.
make money.
Exactly. At the expense of the Kenyans that they want to use as currency in these conversations on a daily basis. Yes, we're fighting for the good of Kenyans. We're making sure that everything is done. We are securing livelihoods for Kenyans. But then in 2 short days, you come and add 80 billion, and Parliament, the same Parliament that we're being told here on a daily basis is fighting for the good of Kenyans, is approving these amounts. What fuckery is this? I don't even understand.
You don't do. You are right about intentions and the manifestation, the good intentions. Huh? We are not living in a vacuum. The question that you asked has been answered in this country. We have to quote President Kibaki again. What did he do? He halted, all these heavy-duty development projects. He halted, just said, stop. We are not doing any such thing for a year. Let's figure out where we are. He brought in somebody called Uhuru. Over a period of time, it wasn't in a day, they slowly but steadily looked for ways of ensuring that they collected as much revenue as they possibly could. But one of the things that happened in that government that I still remember vividly, they made money available and accessible to the citizen. You could borrow with ease. You need to pay, but you could borrow. Now, the moment people have access to money, it means they'll be spending it. If they are spending it within the economy, layman's terms, that economy has money circulating in it. That's how the economy grows. Okay? Came in the Uhuru government, those guys went on a borrowing spree. It's like money was going to go out of fashion. And they borrowed and they borrowed. Truth be told, this government, Uhuru government, where's the difference really? We keep comparing, so and so spent more than this other person.
Those people, they borrowed.
And everyone, they are both, it's like a race to borrow as much as you possibly can. Do you know none of this would be a subject of discussion with so much heat applied to it if the plight of the Mwananchi was addressed, not talked about.
Actually addressed.
But it's clear with every passing day that this is not the agenda.
It's not the intention. And you know what? Look, intent can be proved. Intent can be proved. And it is by the result of an action that you're able to prove intent. If you see that certain things are going in a particular direction, it only shows what somebody intends to do.
Their deeds point you to their intentions. Yes.
This thing doesn't get scientific. It is just clear. You want to make sure you save the country. The little that you have, you guard it. Or you spend less of it. Or you make sure that you have this thing that works so that you get more of it. These people that you say you want to protect, you make sure that you actually are protecting them. It means that you don't go spend millions on a breakfast. It means that you send money to schools. It means that you don't add more to a budget, which you do not have. I said the last one, they've not finished, which you do not have. You can see the signs. They're hitting you in the face on a daily basis, but then you still go and approve more. From where? The air? Where is it going to come from?
It's just crazy. So, Kenyans, as we talk about the finance bill will come after the budget estimates are presented in Parliament. Now, this is where we watch our MPs. If our MPs actually approve that the next year's financial budget is 3.7 trillion shillings. That's it. If they pass this budget estimates of 3.7 trillion shillings, then they have to think of the finance bill and how the finance bill will actually raise a lot of that revenue. So this is why it's important. 3.7 trillion shillings, is it really justified? Is this the time when a government should continue spending this much? And especially looking at where the money is going. Are these the places that money should be going? Spice. We are talking about the budget. So the Committee on Budget and Appropriations of the National Assembly presented its report to the House yesterday, where they are recommending that the government spends about 3.7 trillion shillings in the financial year that begins July. Okay? And then once Parliament discusses the budget estimates and passes the budget estimates, the next thing they'll do is discuss the finance bill. Now, everybody has been talking about the finance bill. This government is taxing us to the bone. It's even taking our hair and our eyebrows and everything. Why is it doing that? It wants a tooth and a tongue. Why? Now, if Parliament okays the government to spend 3.6 trillion shillings, What it also has done is it is allowing the government to raise more taxes and to go with what it's recommending in terms of saying, okay, we want to raise 2.6 trillion shillings in the next financial year. That's a high target. 2.6 trillion shillings target is a very high target. That is all ordinary revenue coming from you, your pocket. And this is why it matters. When you spend that 3.6 trillion shillings, what's the deficit? That is how much is going to be borrowed to bridge that gap between the ordinary revenue raised from you and the amount of money that is going to be spent, that is the 3.6 trillion shillings. As we look at all these figures, and the figures are just being thrown at us left, right, and center, the question that we're asking ourselves today, and you're asking Ndu, is does this government really have our interests at heart? And by government, we mean both Parliament and the executive. Do these elected leaders and representatives of ours have our interests at heart? That's the question we're asking. We'd like to hear what you think on 0719 012 600.
And for me, it's very simple. And nobody needs to tell you. They can tell you things with your mouth, but you will know by their actions. The people who coined the adage that your actions speak louder than words, they knew what they were talking about. That if you really care to have the little bit that you need to sort out the livelihoods of Kenyans, you would not see the spending in excesses that we do. You would not see the approval of many things that we do. Because why go borrow more? What is it that you need to do? Is there a time where you need to say, okay, get all the trimmings out of the way and let's see how we can get ourselves back on level ground? It is an absolute necessary conversation to have. It's not being had. So if somebody sees themselves hurtling down this path of danger and there are certain things that you can do, but you do not do, then what are you saying? You really don't care. Like, because you know there will be a buffer of protection for the very few, but the rest of the folks who are in this thing with you actually don't have that protection. You say you want to protect them, but you're not doing everything you can to, then there's a problem. And it's very simple here. If you want to compare it to the very basic unit of society, which is the family, if the people in the family are having a problem financially and they used to go on holiday every year and they used to send their children to the best of schools and they used to make sure that they had, the best of meals, what would that person do once they got themselves in a bit of a financial pickle? You would see some of that fat start to be trimmed off. It only makes sense. It only makes sense. Do you have to have a fleet of vehicles? No, you do not. Do you need to then go? No, you do not. Not that it would feel bad. You do not have the wherewithal to do it. And that's what we're saying. It's very simple. You don't have the wherewithal to do it. Do not do it. Especially when you have 50 million people in tow that you ought to be taking care of. Especially when you do. And especially when at every opportunity, you open your mouth and you say, it is because of you that we are here. Come on.
You know what's underlying all this, is the government is an innate object. It's not alive. It's the people in it. There seems to be an understanding in this country that so long as you've been in a position of power, that position provides you with immunity. You're bulletproof. They forget the term will come to an end. But there's this idea that you will get away with whatever you do anyway. So it doesn't really matter how outlandish your plans are. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much you misrepresent your people, you will get away with it. This system that we have on this planet doesn't quite work that way. It may appear that you are getting away with it, you never actually do. It will catch up with you, and usually at the most inopportune time. When you least want it, when you least need it, it will come at you. Maybe there's this thinking that, yes, come the time when we need to exit, we could also have a plan B where we don't really exit. The plans of men and mice. How many people have planned and thought they have planned this thing through in the history of this world and the rulership of this world, and how many of them have come a cropper? They've come a cropper because of one simple thing. They neglected their people. It's never any other reason. Never any. And people get to understand that they we cannot expect any good to come from this particular group of individuals. And they say, I think it's time you left, because we do not see any good coming out of this.
No, it isn't. You can't see. I can't see it, unless it can be seen somewhere else that I don't know. My question still remains simply, if you can put aside the moral responsibility or the responsibility that a government has to protect its people, the very simple question for me is, where is the money going to come from?
And when you get it, where does it go exactly?
Yeah, where does it go?
How do you spend it?
How will you spend it? Where is it going to come from? Where does it go? How will you spend it?
Let's hear from you. 0719-012-600. Courier in Nyeri. Good morning.
Morning, guys. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Now, my long time,
Yes.
But now my discussion would be, and I wanted we narrow it down to this.
Okay.
Our taxation system vis-a-vis the services that we get.
Mm-hmm.
In this, Eric, allow me to use you as an example.
Okay.
Eric, you get a payslip.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all these taxes that you pay.
Yes.
So by you paying those taxes, you demand the value of Thika Road, expressway, schooling system, health system. Not so.
Yes.
Now come to Kuria in the village. Kuria has been built for a road, a tarmac road worth 2 billion.
Uh-huh.
In that village that I come from, do we pay the same taxes as you pay, such that I will demand for the value of the road and the value of the water services and the value of education services?
Mm-hmm.
In this, I want to point out to the payslip, that one I've dealt with.
Okay.
There is this business persons who are going to pay the turnover tax.
Yes.
But allow me, Eric, to today pin to, or to go pin to those persons in the village.
Mm-hmm.
Me as courier, do I pay taxes to the national revenue?
Mm-hmm. You do.
Now, in that saying, I will say this. Maybe I had a deal whereby here in the village, I'm going to get one cow, and I send it to Bama such that Eric is going to buy a piece of meat in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Do I pay taxes? Now, that narrows down to a tax that used to be called presumption tax.
Mm.
That KERA deleted, and they said, oh, hold on, we are not going to the presumption tax.
Mm.
Today, if courier goes in the village and goes to a barber shop and I'm cut my hair, that barber shop should contribute to the national exchequer because of the road and the education services and the health services.
Uh-huh.
Maybe our taxation system is so narrowed down to the payslip person such that we do not widen it to a scope. And I will give you the last example. Mm. I'm an agri-business person.
Yep.
Why don't the government bring in a private investor? Go to Abadeas and bring me water. Then tell Courier, you know what, we are going to have maybe a type of arable taxation farming, whereby if Courier you sell goods worth 100,000, kindly pay 10% of your revenue or 3% of your turnover, and even the cows that you traded with, such that Eric and do in that Spice FM payslip, you are not going to be cut the 3% or the 35%. We have already distributed the taxation. Now, from there on, now we are going to get the services and we will be at equal. Otherwise, Eric, I'm sorry to say this. I'm predating on your payslip, yet I'm in the village.
So you don't think there's equity?
There is no equity in the distribution of taxation, because now, Courier, I'm going to get a road worth 20 billion. Do I pay for that 20 billion? You, Eric, you go through expressway. You are aware that you pay that taxation? I mean, we need to have a discussion of distribution of the taxation bracket.
That's a good
and the last thing, why are we borrowing? Are we borrowing to consume or to produce? If at all the borrowing we are doing is for production, and even in the industry, such that we create jobs.
Yeah.
Okay, but then, Eric, let us not borrow Peter to pay Paul. Now, this is a villager who is having such a thought. How about an economist who is paid by the government, Bana? We need to have such a conversation.
Thank you, Courier. Thank you. Have a good day. Let's hear from Jesse, who's in Sagana. Good morning, Jesse.
Hello, Eric.
Hi, good morning.
How you doing? Yes, yeah, say hi to Muga, say hi to Mu.
Morning.
Hi, Jesse.
My question is, hi. My question is, looking at the big picture, the economic situation, this is suicide economics. What is happening in Kenya is nobody has a clue. And this is basically, the politics is hypocrisy, the economics is suicide. For example, let me ask you, who is Musalia Mudavadi in all this? This guy was in the treasury. He's an economics kind of guy. He was a minister of finance. He's in this government of William Ruto. Why isn't he speaking? He has been given an office. He's not talking.
Talking about
That's
what?
the first point. Huh?
Talking about what?
Hello.
Talking about what?
I'm saying, I'm talking about the finance bill and everything.
Why is you're saying Musalia is not talking?
Yes, he's not contributing to this debate, and he has an office.
Well, he has.
Has he really? Are we hearing him? Shouldn't he be on the front line? Shouldn't he be on the front line? I mean, he's the prime minister. He's been given this position. He's been in finance. He's been in treasury. He knows the nitty-gritty of the whole ministry. Yeah, that's the first point. And then the second point is that all these technocrats we have, all these guys in treasury and finance, who go into retirement. You've just retired Patrick Joroge. You've just retired, I don't know who. These guys live in Kenya, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why can there be a forum of all these former economists, these transition economists from the Jubilee government to the Kenya Kwanza government, whatever you want to call it? Why can't they sit down together? The transition is not complete. You can't just change government, bring in pass some new budgets, increase trillions. These figures we talk about trillions. These guys need to sit in a room. The former guys, I get it. All the guys who have worked in treasury from 2015 back now, all these guys need to be put in a room together and to hammer out what the hell is going on. They live in Kenya. It's not a transition. I don't retire and go home to my home in Nyeri or Zaya and sit there and then say, oh, honky dory, let me receive my pension, or we did a small mess. And it reminds me, yesterday Okiya Mtara talked about the zeros that were added. When Uhuru Kenyatta was the finance minister, he said, I made an error. I put a zero somewhere, and instead of 1 billion, it became 1 trillion. And he just said it was what's a computer error? What does that mean? This is subterfuge. It's called, is it subterfuge or it's called, I don't know what it is.
Subterfuge.
Yes, it is subterfuge. We are being played. We are being conked out. And the hypocrisy and the economic suicide has to stop. This plane is crashing. It's on its way down. It's crashing. And Kenyans, I need to know.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good one. Let's hear from you, 0719 600. I've got Opiyo from Kibera, but Opiyo has put us on hold. Opiyo, if you can get on the line and then we hear from you. 0719 600. What you're asking is, with all these things, so the next year's budget is likely going to be 3.7 trillion shillings with the recommendation of the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly. That's likely to be passed by Parliament, and then they will discuss the finance bill, and all those questions that you've been raising on the finance bill will come and they'll be discussed, and also the finance bill is likely to be passed with minimal amendments on the floor of the House. What does that mean? Do you think that those that we have put in positions of authority actually have our interest at heart? Those in Parliament, both the National Assembly and the Senate, those in the National Executive, those in the county assemblies, those in the county executives, because the county budgets will be the next issue that we'll be discussing in a few days' time. Opiyo from Kibera, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very fine.
Karibu sana to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Asante. Now,
Yep.
Before I make my contribution, Titi Muga looks very, very well this morning.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes. Now, mine is a question for the president, actually. Now, this guy keeps saying that he's creating houses for people who are living in the slums, right? Then he goes ahead and says that he's creating jobs for people who live in the slums again. Ndio? Now, to my understanding, those who will get the houses are people who are being deducted from their pay slips. These people from the slums don't have pay slips. So, when the houses are done, let's just assume they'll be done. When they're done, you'll get a house because you paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these people from the slums didn't pay for the houses. So, which house will they get? Yet, they didn't pay for one. Now, that's my question, because it's very confusing, because now you won't go there and say that I'm from Kibera and these houses are mine. Okay, where are deductions?
Opio, I hear you. The issue of the housing fund, no matter how many times it's explained, there'll always be somebody who's left the question, some confusion somewhere. And yes, those are many questions that keep asking and they keep cropping. The only thing is we keep
and
asking.
Another one.
Yeah.
This thing of investors and contractors. Now, is there a difference between an investor and a contractor?
Yes.
There's a big difference.
Yes.
Because an investor puts money and expects profit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, the government is bringing those people from the private sector to build houses. When the houses are done, we won't be paying those people from the private sector because they're using our money to build the houses.
They're using their money to build the houses, and when they're finished, the government says they will
Pay them.
They will pay them.
Oh, understood. Okay, but now my first question is of concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Opio. Thank you. Catherine in Nakuru, good morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. I would like to contribute on the agenda of today.
Yep.
Sometimes I feel sad when I see Kenyans complaining because it is a bed we laid. We are used to making laws with bottlenecks and we have no exit points. I hear people compare Kibaki regime with Uhuru regime, with Kenya Kwanza regime, and wonder, do these people live in this Kenya? Kibaki regime never had 47 counties to feed. Kibaki regime never had 47 counties to loot. But when it came to Uhuru regime, that is when we started. When we started these 47 counties, a replica of the national government with so many employees, everybody is employed. Nowadays, nearly 50% of our counties, they are employed by the county government. Did we have enough money to do that as Kenya? What did we add as exports or something like that? Today, if we talk about Constitution 2010, I believe 50% was a scam because it has put us into these problems. It was a very expensive constitution, and the late President Moi talked about it, but nobody would listen because of our nature of our politics. We don't listen to our opponents complain. It's a very expensive constitution, and it was said so. But what did we do? Because of the nature of our politics, we did it. Then, if today anybody complains about Constitution 2010, you are told you are against devolution. This is where we went wrong.
Okay.
And this is where we are going wrong. How do we go back? Who wants his county to be abolished? We cannot go. We don't know how to go back and retract. Because now they have become political looting sprees.
So what do we do?
Looting institutions. So what we can do is, we laid our bed, we have to sleep on it. If the government now is not able to pay salaries the way we are seeing, it is not. We should be there because we laid our bed. We should be silent and wait for the government to slaughter us in that slaughterhouse we put ourselves in. I rest my case.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much to everybody also who's called in this morning. The conversations continue, and we'd like, to have these debates going on our social media at Spice FM KE on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Keep contributing. Let's all have a conversation. That's the whole point of even having this show. So we can discuss things, we can find solutions somewhere, we can propose our solutions to our leaders. And even when our leaders don't listen, we make them listen.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.